Yeah, well, Jesus was born into a culture war. Um, and isn't it fascinating that Jesus, he calls 12 disciples, and among them there's Matthew, the tax collector, who's literally a collaborator with the Romans. But there's also Simon the Zealot, who's like a freedom fighter stroke. I don't know, is he a terrorist? Those freedom fighters really do not have the same attitude to Rome as the tax collectors do. And he is uniting into one body people who have radically different visions of culture and politics. If we think it's unique and if we think it's just social media that creates this, no, this is part of the human condition. This is part of what culture is like. It's part of what humans are like.
Welcome to Rekindled Faith. My name is Melanie Bearda.
And I'm Andi Wallens.
Whether you've been wrestling with questions, facing doubt, or simply uninspired, Season 4 is here to welcome you home after a season of wandering.
So pull up a chair and be embraced by the goodness of Christ.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to Rekindled Faith. Today we have with us Glen Scrivener. He is a writer, speaker, filmmaker, podcaster, and church minister. He serves as the director for Speak Life, and he is a presenter for the 3-2-1 course. Welcome to the show, Glen.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. And I also have my co-host, Andi Wallens, with us here today.
Hi.
So welcome to the show. We're pretty excited to have you on with us today. Really, this is going to be an open conversation just about Christianity. In particular, I read your book, The Air We Breathe, and I thought it was a great book. Actually, Andy Steiger from Apologetics Canada told me to buy this book and read it. So good job, Andy.
Thank you, Andy.
Yeah. So you got people in Canada hustling out your books for you.
Yeah.
Hey, the check's in the post, Andy. Yeah.
There you go. All right. So for listeners that maybe haven't seen this book, it's called The Air We Breathe. And then the subtitle is How We All Came to Believe in Freedom, Kindness, Progress, and Equality. And so first of all, I'd love for you to introduce yourself, for listeners that maybe are not familiar with the work that you're doing in Speak Life and the 3-2-1 course. Maybe you can just elaborate a little bit more on that. And who are you, Glen?
So I'm Australian. I live in the UK because, I'm from Sydney and my wife is from Belfast in Northern Ireland. And so we live on the south coast of England, which she thinks is halfway. And I let her think that. And that's the secret to a good marriage. And we have 2 kids, Ruby and JJ. And I'm ordained in the Church of England, but my day job is to work as an evangelist, which means I get to spend time on YouTube. And we've got the Speak Life YouTube channel if people are wanting to subscribe to that, or our podcast, the Speak Life podcast. We've got a course called 3-2-1, which is an introduction to who is Jesus. And I speak around the place. I sort of write. I do some social media stuff and videography and that sort of thing. But I guess in all things, I just want to make some noise about Jesus because I think he's fantastic and he's made sense of my life and saved me and given me everything really in life. And so I just want to speak much of him and help Christians to share their faith in ways that make sense today.
Yeah, so good. I love that.
I actually have a follow-up question. I'm just curious about, because when I was watching your videos on YouTube, you were talking about the Church of England. We're in Canada. We don't really have like that, the Church of Canada. Can you just tell me a little bit like what that is?
Yeah. So if you saw the coronation of King Charles, basically the Archbishop of Canterbury in Westminster Abbey is anointing King Charles, who is, King of Australia as well as Canada, as well as the rest of the Commonwealth, but King of England too. And it's a religious ceremony in which the head of state is actually underneath some kind of divine sacred order. That's the idea anyway, in a kind of a sacral monarchy, a constitutional monarchy, such as exists here in Britain. And there is an upper house and a lower house. In terms of parliament here in the UK, our upper house is unelected. There are 22 bishops, I believe, in this unelected upper house in the Church of England, within England. And then the Church of England, there's a parish system all throughout the nation. Every single square inch of England is covered by the parish system. And if you are in our parish, you can knock on the door of the pastor, the vicar, as it were, and you can ask for baptism, and you can ask to get married in our churches, and you can ask to be buried by us, and so in lots of senses, the Church of England plays chaplain to the entire nation, and that's for better and for worse. So I think in general people have a quite positive attitude towards the Church of England, but it's also the sort of background music that people tune out. And so I think there's a sort of a positive regard towards Christianity in a lot of senses in the UK that I don't get in Australia. Australia is very much like Canada. There might be an Anglican sort of a church in Australia, but it is not the state church in that same way. And so church and state are much more separated in Australia and in Canada than they are here. And that means that the church is more distinct and it has a more distinctive voice, and that is for better and for worse. So that I think in Australia, the church is stronger, it is more distinctive. Probably more people go to church in Australia than go to church in England. But I think culturally, Australians wear more of a sneer towards Christians than they do in England. And that's just one of those double-edged swords about having a state church. It is a warm presence in the culture, but it can be a warm presence that gets taken for granted and means that people don't actually take seriously the distinctiveness of what Christians are saying.
Awesome. Yeah, I watched one of your videos where you're talking about the revival happening in England, especially, and you gave all those stats of the people coming to the church. I'm sure the Church of England is playing a big part in that. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
So interestingly, other churches are seeing a much more of an increase, and it's an increase from a much lower base rate. We're all very excited in the UK because, one very large survey has said that church-going has gone from 8% to 12% between 2018 and 2024. And that is monthly self-reported church-going. It's not the same thing as people actually showing up on a Sunday. And when the same statistics are run in Australia, for instance, there's something like more like 20% of Australians self-report as going to church at least monthly. And so lots of people are finding themselves to be envious of what's going on in England, when actually what's going on in England is much less impressive than what's going on in many other parts of the Anglophone world. So, but also the Church of England is not really increasing in numbers. Roman Catholics are seeing a massive increase, and Pentecostals are seeing a massive increase in church attendance. And two of those factors, I guess, one of the factors is immigration. A lot of the places where England has received many more foreigners from more Catholic countries and more countries where Pentecostalism is more common. But also, I think there's something about the strangeness, the non-ordinariness of either Pentecostal worship or Roman Catholic worship. That is playing a part right now. I think when people come to church, what they want is not the same thing as what they will get if they slept in on a Sunday morning and just scrolled through Instagram. I think they want to come to church for something that is a vertical encounter with God, a vertical encounter with transcendence and strangeness. And in very different ways, going to a Pentecostal church and going to a Roman Catholic church actually provides that kind of difference, which I think is what people are after in this moment.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely have noticed, I haven't looked at the stats. You sound very smart with all your stats. So I'm going to go home and listen to some more stats. But I definitely have noticed in my own life and even in my church that we have had a lot of more people coming into the church. Even just the other day, I was sitting next to a lady and I really liked her sweater. So I told her, I like your sweater. And that was her second time at church. So I think it's just like it's on the rise where people are becoming more and more curious about what it is. I think with that too, there's a lot of hostility still from the secular realm towards Christian faith. Like I know some kids in my community that go to a public school and they're Christian, and when they have brought up their faith or anything, they've been shut down by other kids. And it's just it's interesting how, like my perspective is that my faith is my identity. It is the reason, the air that I breathe. Like it is everything to me. And when people try to shut that part of me down, it's like you don't really value who I am then, because it is literally everything to me. And so I don't know, like I think that there's definitely like a wrestle and a struggle within culture and community right now, where people are kind of trying to figure this thing out and really investigate for themselves, which I think is so key.
Yeah. Well, I think in amidst what they're calling the quiet revival here in the UK, I think that's probably not the best term for what's going on. But I think people are expecting that because a significant minority of people are now more open to faith, therefore Christians are popular now. Therefore, we will be welcomed into the halls of power. Therefore, Christians are not weird in the culture anymore. And none of those things are true at all. It is merely that a significant minority is now significantly more open to Christian faith, and they're significantly more open to other spiritual things like witch talk, like the New Age, like Islam, like all sorts of other spiritual answers that are being given out there. And it is simply not the case that whatever revival we are seeing will make our lives any easier as Christians. And I beg people not to pray for revival so that their life gets easier.
Yeah.
If you've read anything about revival in church history, it doesn't make life easier at all. And this won't make life easier for us. I think, never in my lifetime in the UK have we been closer to a biblical revival. But also never have we been closer to a time when, I think church leaders could go to prison for some pretty basic Christian convictions. It will all happen together, right? and even as lots more people will become interested and come to faith, I think it will be harder politically to be a Christian. I think it will be harder culturally to be a Christian. This is not us kind of giving ourselves a high five and saying, we are so back. That is not what any of this is about. And nobody should want revival so that their life gets easier and people will have warm, fuzzy feelings about Christians from now on. None of this is about people having warm, fuzzy feelings about Christians. It is about a significant minority of people who will, because Charlie Kirk was assassinated, think to themselves, I need to figure out what's going on in my life, and I'm just going to show up in church. And that is by no means a majority of the culture. But if we simply paid attention to those people who are now so spiritually hungry, we would have all our work cut out for us. We would have plenty to do without seeing 98% of the culture won for Christ. We're not going to see 98% of the culture won for Christ. We're going to see a significant minority who are much more interested, and we are going to see increasing opposition to Christians. And this is not about taking the nation back for Christ and all that kind of stuff. It is about offering Christ in the midst of a storm in which people are recognizing that the foundations have been sinking sand, but I have found this community of people that is built on the rock of Christ, and I'm a refugee from that meaning crisis. And in that context, we will see revival, but it won't be plain sailing for the church.
Mm-hmm. I think that's beautiful. I feel like sometimes we can do a disservice to people. Like when we evangelize and just rah, come to Jesus, come on over here. But then we don't set people up for success in the church, of knowing, like in my own Christian journey, I've gone through some really dark times, some really difficult seasons. And I had to wrestle with that and learn how to lean on Christ in the midst of that hardship. And I think sometimes people just see or want to have Jesus so that they have that pink fluffy cloud and nothing hurts anymore. But that is not the reality in my experience.
No, same for me. Coming to the faith later in life and leaving I was very involved with astrology and tarot and making a lot of money doing courses for that. And I never had anyone say anything about, like, oh, maybe you're a little brainwashed by this stuff. Maybe this isn't great. And as soon as I became Christian, I lost a lot of friends, a lot of people in my life, a lot of arguments with people, a lot of like backlash. And it's not an easy path. And I think it is good for people to know that when they're coming to the faith, you have these two things happening at once, this like beautiful relationship with Jesus and the Bible and your church friends. And it's like this aliveness I've never experienced in my life, this deep relationship. And yet there's like a persecution at the same time. That's a strong word for people that are actually getting persecuted. I'm not going to say I was persecuted in the way that a lot of people are, but there's the sense that could happen sometime in my life. It's always in my mind that especially going public with faith and talking on podcasts and things like that, there's this, okay, is that going to be part of the story of my life? And so, it's these two things happening at once. So I guess it's like the Bible says, we have to not lean on ourselves, but on Jesus and the strength that we get from him and our church and other Christians in order to make it through. Because the backlash is crazy. I've lost followers, I've lost people, and yet at the same time, I've also had people reaching out saying, "Oh, I see you became Christian a couple years ago. Tell me about that journey." So it, like you're saying, Glenn, it really is a mixed thing. The two things are happening at once, and it's How do you deal with that? Or I was curious as well. When did you come to faith? Or were you always Christian? Were you?
So I grew up in Australia, and my mum's always been a great believer and has always kind of loved Jesus and been a good influence on me. My father really wasn't, and kind of that was always a massive split for us as a family, because my father kind of presented himself as a Christian and then like very dramatically showed himself not to be in lots of different ways. I think the choice growing up was, whether to think of Christians as more like my mum or as more like my dad, and therefore I think in my teenage years I concluded that Christians were hypocrites, and towards the end of my teenage years kind of walked away from church and faith. And at the end of my college years, university, a friend of mine invited me to church, and I went to hate the preacher, and then I went back the following Sunday to hate him some more, and then to hate him some more, and then eventually I hated him some less. And my friend said, "Why don't we read through the Gospels?" And I do remember reading through Luke's Gospel, and just my friend was very good at redirecting my expectations. I had thought of God as a little bit like my dad, right? And therefore that was not the attractive vision of God that I needed. But he was constantly saying, look, the image of God is not your dad. The image of God is Christ, who is the Son of the Father. That's what like Son of God means. He's like a chip off the old block. Like Jesus is the image of the invisible God. That's what the New Testament says. Is Jesus a vision for God that you could get on board with? And I just remember getting halfway through Luke's Gospel and just think, oh yeah, well, if God is like Jesus, I'm in. And so I sort of jumped in with both feet, aged about 21. And my life has never been the same, really. And one verse that was really important for me very early on as a Christian ties back to everything we've been talking about. It's Philippians chapter 3, verse 10, where Paul, he looks back at his spiritual CV, his spiritual resume. And he had been resume building throughout his life. And, I was a Hebrew of Hebrews, and I was from the tribe of Benjamin, and I was circumcised on the 8th day. And, he was really investing in his spiritual, brownie points. And he just says, all of that is rubbish compared to the surpassing greatness of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord, for whose sake I've lost all things. I consider them dung, that I may gain Christ and be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but the righteousness that is by faith. And then he says, Philippians 3, verse 10, I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of sharing in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death. And And that has been such a kind of a life verse for me, because the first half of the verse just sounds all really lovely. I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection. Who doesn't want that? Sounds great. And the fellowship of sharing in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death. And it's like, you're going to need the resurrection of Jesus because you're going to walk through the valley of deep shadow with Jesus. But the good news is you will have fellowship with Jesus in suffering. And that's just an extraordinary thing to be promised. And then it's an extraordinary thing to experience that, I've never known Jesus better than when I'm in the darkest valley. And, and I never knew that Jesus is all I need until Jesus is all I have. And that's been the testimony of so many Christians, and certainly been my testimony, that Jesus is just so good. And that doesn't mean a kind of a prosperity gospel of you come to Jesus and, instantly you get a girlfriend and you get money and your skin improves. And he meets you in the darkest valley. But then if you've got your head screwed on right, you wouldn't want to be anywhere else than there with Jesus. And so that's been sort of my experience over the last 20 years. And it's just a real privilege of mine to be able to introduce this same Jesus to others.
That's awesome.
Absolutely.
I find that super relatable too, because for my story, I walked away from faith as a teenager because I thought Christians were hypocrites. And then at 21, I ended up hitting rock bottom and no one was there except Jesus. And I, in that moment, gave my life over to him. And I mean, it wasn't all rainbows and butterflies again. It was difficult to get myself out of that season of life that I put myself in. And, but yeah, he was faithful to be with me in that wreckage and also call me out from there. And, some of the hardest seasons of my life have also been some of the most deep seasons with Christ, where I've just realized that everybody in my life gets kind of peeled away and I'm just exposed, raw, and broken. And the only one that can meet me in that is Christ. So I don't know, I think humanity likes to run away from uncomfortable feelings, but I think sometimes we need to be exposed in the face of Christ and just be okay with that vulnerability, because he is the one and the only that will sustain us, will offer us hope and healing. So I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And for all these people coming to faith and people that are reaching out, probably you get people reaching out to you. I mean, probably Glenn, you probably get tons of people reaching out to you as well that are coming back to the faith. But is it going to stick when something gets hard? Are they, the seed that is on rocky soil? Are they the seed that is going to grow? What kind of seed are we looking at? So how do we, as people that feel this calling to share the gospel and share the word and spread this and, called to do it online or whatever, how do we have the seed fall on good soil? I think that maybe is part of what we're trying to do, right? We can't bring them to Jesus, but we can maybe help nourish that soil.
Well, isn't that interesting as a parable? And it's the first parable that Jesus tells in Mark's gospel, and then in Mark 4, and the parallel is in Matthew 13. And Jesus says, if you don't understand this parable, you won't understand any parable. It's sort of the parable of parables. And it's all about scattering the seed of the word on these 4 different soil types. And on some soil types, it's like the path, and the birds come and gobble it up. And Jesus describes this as like satanic opposition. And then the second soil type, which you're referring to, is this rocky soil, and it's shallow, and the seed sprouts up immediately, and then it withers in the sun. And this is like people who initially receive Jesus with joy, and then when trouble or persecution comes because of the gospel, they fall away. And it's just interesting that Jesus uses the word when there. When trouble and persecution come because of the word, they fall away. And then Jesus says there's other seed that's sown among thorns, and the thorns he relates to wealth, worry, and desires for other things, which sounds like modern life, doesn't it? Modern life sounds like wealth, worry, and wanting. And it's choking the spiritual life out of all of us. And then there's the good soil that can produce a crop 30, 60, 100 times what is sown. One of the fascinating things about this parable, and I've written a whole book about this parable, actually, it's called How to Speak Life. And one of the things that constantly amazes me about it is that Jesus doesn't give you plan B. Like plan A is just sow the seed. And with some people, they will be so closed, and you just think, "Oh gosh, is there something spiritual going on here? Is there a diabolical power at play?" And with some people, they will love Jesus for a bit, but the moment that it costs them anything, they're out. And some people, yeah, they still say they love Jesus, but life is just choking them at the moment, and wealth and worry and wanting is really curtailing their spiritual life. And some people are just like really surprisingly open. But Jesus doesn't say, look, if the seed falls on the path, what you really need to do, and if the birds come along, you need to buy a gun and shoot the birds, or put up a scarecrow. He doesn't tell you to do it. There is no plan B. And if there's shallow soil, he does not say get a shovel and break up the soil. And if it falls among the thorns, he doesn't say get some secateurs and cut back the thorns. There is no plan B. There just is plan A. And I think what Jesus really wants from us is the joyful attitude of the sower who's just got fistfuls of seed, and out of an abundance, out of an excess of joy and of confidence in Jesus, we are just to be like this sower. And this sower is not very strategic, are they? Like if you were strategic, what on earth are you doing, like sowing among thorns or sowing on the path, like you idiot? This is moronic if you are just into maximizing efficiency. This is not a parable. And Jesus' kingdom is not really about maximizing efficiency. You have good seed and there is good soil out there. And if the word of Jesus just reaches the person who is ready in that moment, 30, 60, 100 times what is sown, this is like a 10,000% yield. So it looks really inefficient, but my goodness, when it works, it really works. But largely, the experience of sharing Jesus with your friends will be the experience of this sower scattering seed. And at the end of the day of this sower scattering seed, you could ask the sower, what was it like? How did you find this experience of scattering seed? They would say, hit and miss, mainly miss. And when I'm explaining my evangelism to other people, if I'm talking to the board of trustees that govern Speak Life as a ministry, if they ask me, Glenn, how has evangelism been this month? I can just give that answer. It's been hit and miss, mainly miss. But there is a joyful excess to Jesus and his supply of gospel good news for the world. And I think that's what we're meant to kind of take from that parable, and the recognition that soil types change. And right now somebody might be the shallow soil, but they change. I used to be shallow soil, and I used to be thorny soil, and I used to be diabolically shut to the gospel. And here I am today as a Christian. People change, but I can't break up the soil. I can't do anything except myself be joyful in Jesus and share a little bit of him. And then it's entirely down to God, which just takes the pressure off me. The weight is off my shoulders. I'll just give one story about this because I've spoken for a long time, I realize, but I was preaching at a church for 3 years before I went away to seminary to become a church minister. And at this church, there were many, many people who were not yet Christians. They still kept coming every Sunday, but they weren't yet Christians. And my final sermon to them was just, please come home to Jesus. He's fantastic. Come, trust Jesus, trust Jesus. And I was in tears in this sermon. And at the end of it, I was an absolute wreck. And, absolutely slumped in the corner as everybody was, having coffee and tea and refreshments afterwards. And a friend of mine was taking around trays of coffees for people afterwards. And he just saw me absolutely crestfallen. And he had 4 words for me as he passed me a cup of coffee. And they utterly transformed my outlook And it was the most efficient pastoral care I've ever experienced in my life. Four words to change my mood. He just said, "You sowed the seed." And I was like, okay, I sowed the seed. That's good. And I drank my coffee and I moved on, which is the other thing that the sower of the seed does. You know, they sow the seed and they move on and they trust God. Like, God is good, and there is good seed, and it will find good soil, and there will be joyous transformation when that seed reaches that soil. But it's not in our power to make life happen.
Yeah. And I love that personally because there's, like you said, like the pressure is off, but we've been invited into God's story, and, God uses people to bring other people to faith in him. But also God doesn't, like, if I fail to show up for somebody, I'm like walking past somebody and God's like, "Hey, Melanie, go sow a seed." And I miss it because I'm like, "Oh no, it's too scary." And Andi comes along and God says the same thing to her. Like, if I don't accept the invitation, somebody else will receive that invitation. Like, God doesn't just give up if I choose not to do things, which I like because it takes the pressure off. I also try to be a little bit more bold in my faith and a little bit more willing to like have those like conversations about who God is and stuff like that. And that's something that I've had to grow into. Like, for me growing up, like I said, like I thought Christians were super hypocritical. And so I had a lot of years of like trying to figure out like, who is God? How do I fit into this story? What's the point of this story? And then it was actually like, talk about like moments of brokenness, COVID-19, the pandemic. I'm just like, all of a sudden I just get this fire under my butt of like, you need to learn how to articulate the gospel and share it with people. And I'm like, whoa, that's terrifying. But like COVID-19 is what prompted me to like be here with you on this podcast. Like, who am I? I don't know. And then, yeah, like even like the Charlie Kirk thing, like Andi and I were talking about it and like super like impacted. I'm Canadian. I didn't follow Charlie Kirk. I saw his face. I didn't know his name. Somebody came up to me and was like, "Hey, did you hear Charlie Kirk got shot?" And I'm like, "Who's this? Who is Charlie Kirk?" So, but it still like had a deep impact because like, I don't know everything of what he believed, but I do know that he's a Christian. We share the same values around Christian faith. And, it's impacted me. It was a horrible event and it's impacted me. And again, that fire is lit under my butt that I need to continue to do this. I need to continue to show up for God just as he's shown up for me in every season of my life, even in my season of rebellion. Like, God was constantly present within. And so, yeah, it's just like, I like the fact that he invites us into the story, but it's not on our shoulders to make it happen. If we fall short or fail to show up, he's not like, "Oh no, what am I going to do now?" You know what I mean? Yeah.
That's an interesting reaction, isn't it? So Charlie Kirk vulnerably is speaking words, and he's met with violence, like fatal violence. It has been really strange in one sense that should inspire people to take their faith more seriously, because you might think, well, we should be more fearful now, right? If that's what speaking up for, I mean, was he speaking up for Jesus? Yes, and he did preach the gospel. There was also a whole bunch of politics going on and all sorts of things. But I do admire how forthrightly he spoke of Jesus alongside a whole bunch of other things. But it's interesting that he has inspired more people to take their faith more seriously, when you might, from one perspective, expect people to be more fearful of owning any kind of Christian faith if this is what happens to us. But it's kind of an anti-fragile moment, isn't it? It's kind of a moment where people are being challenged, and they like to see that challenge in this world is a meaningful thing to rise to, rather than self-fulfillment, which is sort of the gospel of our time, is just you do you and cut the toxic people out of your life. And it's all about your self-fulfillment. I think Charlie Kirk has been an example of somebody doing a costly thing that has ended up costing him everything. And it has inspired others to step into the costly thing. And I think that's where people are finding this counterintuitive but deep sense of meaning. And even here on this side of the Atlantic, there are definitely people showing up in church because of this moment. But it's an interesting dynamic.
And I think it's like I know that it's true, right? Like I know the story is true. I know that I know that I know that I know that it's true. And so, like it does, like when I think about it, like why would I want to put myself in a position where potentially somebody could shoot me because I believe what I believe? I don't want to get shot. Please don't shoot me. But I think that it just really solidified for me that like, it's not just some fluffy feelings I have about this Jesus guy who like died on a cross and, now all my sins are forgiven and I'm happy go lucky free. But I think that's where the disconnect is with people that haven't had the seed sown on the good soil and they don't understand the truth of the gospel. And even if you say Jesus loves you, they're like, well, whatever, that means nothing to me. Like, because they don't know the Father. And so, what do you think, Andi?
Yeah, I was just thinking about what you were saying, Glenn, about Charlie Kirk and the sower, and I was tying that together because I was thinking how I knew who he was. I listened to a lot of the things he said. I thought he shared the gospel in a really beautiful way. Maybe politically, of course, maybe I don't agree with everything. I don't know all his beliefs, but when we're talking about the parable of the sower, I think a lot of people that are coming to the faith are looking, who is the sower? What is their life? How are they sharing the gospel? And I think they're looking to people that are, living true. And both of you gave examples of seeing a lot of hypocrisy, right? So they're looking for people. Are they actually living the Christian values? And in my experience, what really brought me to faith was I witnessed, similarly to you, Glenn, my mom, a non-Christian, my dad, a Christian who came to faith later. I witnessed my dad's life and saw this man who was happy, who was healthy, who got remarried, who went on missionaries trips all over the world, and so we're witnessing, we're seeing, and my sister said something recently. She said, anything you say about the gospel doesn't really hit because she's not open for her own reasons, but watching your life change is what really gets me. And I think with the Charlie Kirk thing, he really met people on an emotional level because they saw a person who was really living what he was preaching. And I don't know what you guys think of that. What's the role, Glenn, since you kind of teach this stuff, of the sower? In that obviously we're not perfect, but how do we be a good sower and live that example so that bring people to the faith? Or
well, I mean, one thing to think about this whole parable is, the seed is the word of God, says Jesus as he's explaining what the parable means. And it's interesting that both seed and word are titles for Christ in the Bible. Seed is perhaps one of the earliest titles for Christ. Genesis chapter 3, you've got Adam and Eve, and the whole story about Adam and Eve, like the way of Adam is the way of raising yourself up, grasping at the forbidden fruit, and tumbling down into death. That's the sort of the pathway of Adam. And he grasps at fruit and dies. And then within Genesis 3, the answer to the way of Adam is the way of Christ. In Genesis 3, verse 15, the Lord preaches the gospel to the serpent, actually, and says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He, the seed of the woman, will crush your head, serpent, and you will strike his heel. And so here is the preaching of the gospel right there on, the third chapter of the Bible. As soon as creation unravels, the gospel is proclaimed. And what you've got there is that the seed of the woman is going to go on a very different path to Adam. Adam grasps at fruit. There is an offspring of the woman, the seed of the woman, who's going to go down, because that's what seeds do. Seeds go down and then they rise up. And this seed, the offspring of the woman, is going to be struck by Satan. His own heel will be struck even as he deals the death blow to evil. And so the way of the cross is just woven into this imagery around seeds. And I think as we try to do a Mark chapter 4 type thing, I think we need to go the way of the seed, even as we're sowers. Jesus, the night before he dies, what does he say? He says, unless a grain of wheat dies, it remains alone. But if it dies and rises again, it creates many seeds, right? The way of fruitfulness is actually the way of going down and up. It's actually the way of being planted and rising. It's the way of cross and resurrection. And so, isn't it fascinating that Charlie Kirk would die, and that Sunday, I don't know how many more thousands of people went to church because of Charlie Kirk, but there was something of a resurrection. There was something of spiritual power that is unleashed when the way of the cross is embraced. And I think part of what's going on as people looked at the Charlie Kirk story, and again, this is not to say that Charlie is Jesus in every sense or anything like that, but certainly there are archetypes that are going on here. And what you saw at that university in Utah was somebody merely with words offering, hopefully, persuasion, right? Offering words with a Freedom T-shirt on and whatever the sign was that was above Charlie Kirk. What did it say? Something like
Prove me wrong.
Prove me wrong, right? I'm coming at you, armed only with words, armed only with argumentation, only with persuasion. And then what I myself experienced and what so many people I've spoken to have experienced is that we weren't looking to see the moment of Charlie Kirk's death, and yet online, there it was. And we saw the most stark difference between words going out and violence coming back. And having the way of words being met by the way of violence is just such an affront to the way of Jesus. But it's also an archetype of what happened when Christ came, right? Christ came as the Word of God, and we silenced the Word. He came as the seed, and we buried the seed. He came as the truth, and we killed the truth, right? He came as God, and we murdered God. But there is a power to the seed, right? That when it is buried, that is when its power becomes unleashed. And so I think what we're seeing in this example is a real gospel dynamic of vulnerability in offering words of hope that, though it might be met with the most violent force, the truth really does set you free. The truth annoys people a heck of a lot. It ticks everybody off, but it ultimately sets free. And so what does this call forth from us as those who are sowers of the seed, as those who are, preachers of this gospel, sharers of Jesus? We are to embrace the way of the seed, to embrace that way of martyrdom, because may we never forget that the Greek word for martyr means witness, right? And it is such a witness to the world when we embrace the way of going low like a seed, of service, of sacrifice. And hopefully very few of us will have to lay down our lives in one go, the way that Charlie Kirk laid down his life in one go. But hopefully we will still have the opportunity to lay our lives down. It's just that we will get to do it in installments. And we are still called to be martyrs, and hopefully we won't have to be martyrs the way that Charlie Kirk was a martyr, but we will go the way of the seed. We will go the way of going low. We will go the way of sacrifice and service. But that is actually where the power is, and I think we're starting to see that even in the reactions that are coming in as we've seen Charlie Kirk die.
Yeah.
Do you have a follow-up? I have a follow-up.
Go for it.
You talked a lot, Glenn, about this idea that the secular and the sacred in other cultures and also in past societies, like I think you used the example of the Greeks, it was merged. So when we're talking about someone like Charlie Kirk, he was merging the sacred and the secular in a lot of senses. And I think we don't know the reason why he was killed, if it was religious or it was political or both. So I think what you were suggesting is that we might be returning or potentially returning to that kind of secular and sacred. What do you call it? Secular? I can't remember what you called it.
Sacrecular or whatever.
Yeah. It was a neat term. But do you think that's a good thing, that we're conflating politics and religion? So even at the memorial, there was this like political, religious, they were calling it Christian national, and it enrages people because they're coming together as one. But is that maybe a good thing, or is it not a good thing in your view?
So the conversation about Christian nationalism is really thorny, and I think a lot of people need to have a lot of patience and be more particular about what they mean when they're sort of talking about Christian nationalism. I spoke about Britain as a Christian nation earlier. The Archbishop of Canterbury anoints Charles the King in a cathedral. And like, what do you call that? That's a Christian nation. Like, I think pretty uncontroversially, that is a Christian nation. But the history of like North American countries is very different from Britain and very different from one another between Canada and the USA. And so the mixing of church and state, especially in the US, is just such a contested thing. But it's so hilarious from a British perspective, where there isn't really loud calls for separation of church and state, but it's an incredibly secular politics in which you probably have to pretend not to have a Christian faith in order to get on in public life. Whereas in the USA, very loudly, it is trumpeted that there is a separation of church and state. And yet you pretty much have to pretend you do have a Christian faith in order to get on in public life. It's just a profoundly different experience. And one of the dangers of social media is that we can pick up slogans from other parts of the world and apply them to ourselves in ways that just are not very discerning and not very thoughtful. So the Charlie Kirk Memorial, my goodness, there's literally nothing more Christian than Erica Kirk saying, "I forgive the shooter of my husband." There's literally nothing more Christian than that. And there's literally nothing more post-Christian than Donald Trump saying, "I hate my opponents. I hate them." You're like,
yeah.
Like, and so, so at that point, you see the wisdom of cautions around church and state and that sort of thing. But man, it's so tricky. You need to have a long historical lens. And if people want to come onto the Speak Life podcast, we've got lots of videos about how very Christian our understanding of both church and state have been. And even among secular people, it's actually a Christian idea, the secular. When you divorce it from Christianity and just are left with secularism, it really doesn't work. But then if you just have this secularism and you want to bolt onto it a political program called Christian nationalism that is a power grab, that's not going to work either. So we need a lot more patience, a lot more particularity. We need to figure out Christian history. We need to figure out what Scripture says from Old and New Testaments. It's a much longer conversation, but unfortunately, people don't have an appetite for long conversations. They just have an appetite for slogans, and we just kind of beat each other over the head with our slogans like baseball bats, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I've even noticed that if you question things or just like ask for resources or more, like not from a position of like, give me your facts, but like a position of, hey, this is really curious to me. I'd like to look further into it. Can you share with me where you got this information? And they just blow up on you. Like if they're not in your echo chamber, they're like, don't talk to me and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, whoa, like I'm not coming from a position of trying to make you feel stupid. I just genuinely want to understand the research, the facts, the context. So I found that interesting.
Well, social media is forming us in some really unfortunate ways and making us not able to hear one another. And even on the subject of Charlie Kirk that we've been talking about, one of the real issues is even having this conversation. One of you was aware of Charlie Kirk before he died, one of you wasn't. And then afterwards, the kind of Charlie Kirk that people become aware of is so determined by your media diet. And the algorithm is feeding me one image of Charlie Kirk, and he's feeding my neighbor a very different image of Charlie Kirk. And then, if I'm having a conversation with my neighbor over the fence about Charlie Kirk, we're talking about two very different people, because we're in these different silos, and we're being fed different visions of reality. And so I just think we need to, again, be far more patient with one another and recognize that context matters, that our social media diets matter, and that the real world and touching grass matters a lot more than having our moral vision shaped by, Elon Musk and and the rage machine and the conflict entrepreneurs who are making money out of just raising our cortisol levels.
Which was actually my question for you. I was like really excited to ask you, because you said that what is it? The content, if it enrages, it engages. That was what you said in one of your videos, and I was thinking your videos, you're pretty good at not rage baiting. A lot of people, and Christian content creators as well, do a lot of rage baiting. It's the controversy. So what's your advice to people who want to share the gospel, who want to share the Lord's message, and don't want to get into this like rage machine social media? You have to make it this edgy thing and argue with people in order for people to listen. Like, how do you do that? And what would be your advice to us or people that want to share the gospel in a Jesus-centered way? But I guess it create some enraging, didn't he? So maybe that's part of it, but I'm curious your take on that.
Yeah. Well, Jesus was born into a culture war, and it was a culture war that became a hot war, within a generation of the crucifixion. And Rome came and just sacked Jerusalem and tore down the temple, and it was such a febrile atmosphere, and different reactions within Israel to how do we cope with Rome, why are we in the position that we're in, was leading to radically different factions. And isn't it fascinating that Jesus, he calls 12 disciples, and among them there's Matthew the tax collector, who's literally a collaborator with the Romans, but there's also Simon the Zealot, who's like a freedom fighter stroke, I don't know, is he a terrorist? Those freedom fighters really do not have the same attitude to Rome as the tax collectors do. And then you got, just kind of fishermen going along, and he is uniting into one body people who have radically different visions of culture and politics. And that is really striking. And when you see Jesus answering questions, the first time you read through the Gospels, you're just like, oh, the Herodians ask him one question, and the Sadducees asking him the next question, and then the Pharisees are asking him the next question, then the teachers of the law are asking him the next question. And you think that these are all people, these are all people coming from the same place. They're not at all. Like he is having to navigate the most thorny cultural issues. And so if we think it's unique, and if we think it's just social media that creates this, no, this is part of the human condition. This is part of what culture is like. It's part of what humans are like. So be aware that this is part of human nature. Be aware of what the algorithm is doing to you, because the algorithm hasn't created this fracture, but my goodness, does it weaponize it? My goodness, does it supercharge it? And just be very aware of you are being formed by this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you are much more cranky than you used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not natural. That's not normal. And in the same way that I think a diet doesn't really work, if you want to cut down on calories, it doesn't generally work to simply, cut down 8% of your calorie intake for each meal. What generally tends to work is intermittent fasting, or you have a fast day, or you go onto a diet where you are intentional about, I'm not going to eat these kinds of foods, and I'm going to. In the same way, if you want to cut down on your social media diet, it won't take you just having some stern words with yourself. It will take patterns. It will take you discipling yourself and saying, you know what? Saturdays is a social media free day, or Sundays is a social media free day, or I will not be on Instagram after 9 p.m. or I will not, or whatever it is for you. I think that is really part of a very important part of our discipleship, actually. When it comes to the kind of content that we want to produce on YouTube, we're constantly aware that picking a side in the culture war will amplify our voice a lot more. And it's much more difficult to be heard if you're trying to see the good in both sides. Just the messaging cuts through a lot more clearly if you're just like, this guy's an idiot. And yet I think there are still so many people who want to understand why some react to Charlie Kirk like this and some react to Charlie Kirk like that. That is still a very worthwhile audience to want to speak to. And so we are trying to find ways in which, so our thumbnail for one of the Charlie Kirk videos we did was just the face of Charlie Kirk. And on one side, it was in red and he's got like a devil's horn. And on the other side, it's blue and he looks like an angel with a halo kind of thing. And on one side, we just put your feed. And on the other side, the word is my feed. And it's interesting that we managed with that video, I think, to really cut through and speak a message of both sides that was popular. And we made a listicle of it. These are the 6 lies you're being fed right now. And like in a sense, we're using all the social media kind of ingredients to brew up this recipe. I think we had a bold, thumbnail image. 6 lies that you're being fed right now. We're playing on the fed and the feed that, you and I have. And so in a sense, we're using all the social media stuff and we're using the algorithm, but we're also trying to use it against itself. We're trying to use it against its polarizing tendencies. So yeah, it's about being wise as serpents and innocent as doves. We haven't concluded that, it's such a dumpster fire we need to get out of there. We have concluded that 3 billion monthly users are on YouTube. If it was a country, it is the most populous country on earth. We want to be missionaries to this place. We need to learn the language. We need to get good at our thumbnails. We need to get good at titles. We need to get good at a hook that will really bring people in. But we need to speak the language of YouTube in order to speak against the gods of YouTube. Right? And it's just a principle of missionary activity. Learn the local language. Do not worship the local gods. And that's just something we're constantly saying to ourselves here at Speak Life. Let's learn the language of social media. Let's make our thumbnails as clickable as we can make them within reason, right? But we learn the language in order that we can speak against the local gods. And the local gods are trying to destroy you. The local gods are trying to polarize us and bring about all kinds of negative consequences. So those are some of the strategies that we're trying to keep uppermost in our thinking.
Yeah, that's great. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we're at the end of our time together today. So first of all, thank you so much for joining us on Rekindled Faith. And just before we head out, could you just let the listeners know if they are interested in getting connected with your ministries and the work that you're doing? Where could they go?
Fantastic. Well, if you're on YouTube, you may as well go and subscribe to us. Just search for Speak Life online, and you'll find me. If you're into podcasts, then why don't you add the Speak Life podcast to your rotation and check us out there. And if you want a way of reconnecting with faith, you might not be a Christian right now, or you might be really interested in sharing your faith with others who are near and dear to you, we've got the 321 course. So if you go to 321course.com, and it's a free online way of actually having a digital introduction to who is Jesus. And over 8 sessions, we talk about Jesus' vision for God, the world, and you. And 30,000 people are doing it right now, and you could be one of them. You could go to 321course.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Glenn, for all your wisdom, and God bless you.
God bless you. Thank you.